Good afternoon. We are beginning our final week. Our final session, excuse me, having a little bit of difficulty getting the video up. There we go. Sorry, I don't know. Well, I've been having, pardon me, been having all kinds of problems here. Couldn't get in at the beginning, and then it had me out of the audio and a few other things. So I think we're ready to go now. We're just a couple minutes late, and I apologize for that short delay. Uh, Tonight, we're going to discuss, or this afternoon, we're going to discuss the three bonus chapters, working within the legal environment, bonus chapter A. Then we will go to bonus chapter C, managing risk, and finally to bonus chapter D, managing personal finance. We've addressed some of these subjects to an extent or so as we've gone through the 20 chapters so far. But this will put a little bit of additional information at your stead, and I'm hopeful it will be useful to you. These are short chapters, these bonus chapters, especially chapters chapters C and D. So we will probably only spend about an hour and a half, or maybe a little bit less than that tonight. And I hope that this is and will be beneficial to you. So we'll look at our learning goals here for bonus chapter A. Distinguish business law, define business law, and then distinguish between statutory, common law, and then explain the role of administrative agencies. Find tort law and explain the role of product liability in tort law. Identify the purposes and conditions of patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Remember, we've talked a little bit about, at least about trademarks in the past. Describe warranties and negotiable instruments as covered in the Uniform Commercial Code, and then list and describe conditions necessary to make a legally enforceable contract. And describe the possible consequences if the contract is violated. I think we should pay particular attention to this last learning goal, because we think of contracts having to be certain things. And in fact, a contract can be simply made on a piece of paper. And then the last goals that we're going to discuss in the bonus chapter A summarize several laws that regulate competition and protect consumers in the United States. Explain the role of tax laws in generating income for the government and as a method of discouraging or encouraging certain behaviors among taxpayers. Distinguish among the various types of bankruptcy as outlined by the Bankruptcy Code. And finally, explain the role of deregulation as a tool to encourage competition. Well, I guess the first question we have to ask here is, why do we have laws? And we have laws in a civilized society. Actually, those peoples that we consider uncivilized, and I want to come back to that in a second, they have rules, regulations, and rituals that they follow. Many of them are just not written down. Now, I used the word uncivilized, and I do not mean to demean anybody when I use that word uncivilized. I'm using that word as how we base what we consider civilization, laws and governance and things of that nature, as opposed to people who live, many tribes in uncharted territories in the Amazon and some places in Africa, perhaps some places in Asia. Certainly the people in the outback of Australia, and many of them still there, many of them not, of course, and some of the Maori in New Zealand. Even perhaps some of the people in certain areas of the Philippines. They don't live by the governance of laws that we have, but they still have things that they follow. Certain things are accepted, certain things are not accepted. The difference between them and us is we have ours written down. Does that make us any better than them? Absolutely not. It just means that we've evolved into a certain way. Some would say not all that well, but we have come to a certain place that we have. Laws, of course, as you know, are enacted by legislative bodies. In cities and in counties, these are usually known as councils or commissions. In states, they're known as the state legislature, and in most states, with the exception of Nebraska, state senates, 2 houses, and then, of course, the federal government made up of the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. They enact laws. Those laws, once they're passed, are signed into law by the executive of that particular governing body, a mayor or a commissioner, in some cases a judge. In Kentucky, we have judges who are administrative judges, and they really don't follow what we call as a judge. We think of sitting on a bench and dressed in some sort of a robe and hearing cases. They're administrative people. Now, it's a lot different. My grandfather was the county judge many, many years ago, and he had a dual responsibility. One of the responsibilities was fiscal, and he was the chair of the fiscal court, and the other was the criminal part. He held court and heard cases and things of that nature. Some years ago, Kentucky separated that, so that person now is known as the judge executive, where my grandfather was known as the county judge. So I think it's county judge executive now. But that's just a little digression to tell you that some places are involved. And then, of course, state laws are signed by the governor, and federal laws signed into law by the president. Now, if state law and federal law can both be vetoed, those acts can be vetoed by the governor or by the president, and then they can be overridden. The veto can be overridden by 2/3 of the members of the various houses, with the exception of Nebraska, it only has 1 house. And then once that veto has been overridden, then it becomes law. So we can have some laws that have never been signed by the executive. And these are the various types of judiciary we have: federal, state, etc. Types of courts that we have, and this is going to give us just a little bit more. The gentleman here in the picture, I'm not exactly sure who that is, but he looks like an individual who used to play professional football for the Minnesota Vikings. I would tell you his name. I think it's Alan Peterson, but I'm not 100% sure of that. It looks like him, may not be. But anyway, we have 2 different types of courts. We have trial courts, which hear criminal law and civil law. And then we have courts that go above that, appeals courts, and then Supreme Courts. At the federal level, we have a district court, an appeals court, and a Supreme Court. At the state level, we have various ancillary courts. We may call them district, we may call them something else, than appeals courts and a Supreme Court. And these are the different types of laws that we have. We have criminal law, which is obviously involved with people who are accused of perpetrating crimes against individuals or property. And then they are brought before the bar. That's what we call that. And they stand there. They used to do stand there, and in England they do stand during the entire trial. Our defendants do not do that in the United States. They're seated, and then there can be a jury, there can be a judge that hears the case, there could be a panel of judges that hears the case. When we talk about appellate courts, those are only judges that hear the appeal. Usually the defendants and prosecutors, et cetera, do not appear. A prosecutor might to plead the case, but the defendant does not. His or her attorneys appeal. Then we have things called business law. These are the things that, notice here it talks about, pardon me, statutes and codes that provide, as the slide says, the framework that allow businesses to conduct business and to do so appropriately within defined rules. We have three different types of law. We have statutory law, common law, and then precedent. A statutory law is law that we just talked about. Those are laws that are passed by a legislative body and signed by the executive. And this is known as written law. And the reason it's known as written law is because it is in writing. You can go to various places. You can even go to the internet and actually see that that law in writing. You can read it and see what it has to say. Common law, on the other hand, comes from a series of rulings that have been handed down over a period of years. And people refer to this as, well, this is what common law says. But common law is not written. You won't find that written any place. But these are things that we have accepted to be true and have followed for many, many years. And in fact, in cases for centuries. And then precedent is partly bound, well, I shouldn't say it's partly bound, but precedent is, we use that to speak of common law quite often. And we also use it to talk about other law that has been set. For instance, several Supreme Court decisions are known as precedents. A major precedent would be the desegregation case in Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954, which declared that separate but equal was unconstitutional. Now, actually, what that did, that overruled the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling of 1896, which did say and which did hold that separate versus equal, separate for whites and separate for blacks, was equal. But the fact of the matter is, those laws were certainly separate. They were set up separately, but there was no equality whatsoever. Anybody who thought there was equality was just being foolish. And it took many, many years to break down those barriers. So if you ever hear separate but equal, just understand that those were laws that were set up, as far as I'm concerned, to keep segregation alive and well. And by the way, you can quote me on that. I firmly believe what I just got through saying. I think I take that from my dad. Somebody was quoting states' rights, and my father was a lawyer. And somebody was quoting states' rights to him, and he just said, that's just a segregation law. That's all that is. Or states' rights is not a law, but it's a philosophy. And he just said, that's just segregation. It's no more than that. Actually, Dad said something a little bit different. I won't repeat exactly what he said, but the idea is exactly what I said. To enforce laws or to help enforce laws, especially at the federal level and the state level, there are administrative agencies. And there's a number of them listed here, and I'm not going to go through them, except we talked a good deal about the Securities and Exchange Commission. We also talked about the Federal Reserve Board. But these agencies have been established by the United States Congress. And the United States Congress has established them to take care of the areas, or to police, to provide jurisdiction for the areas over which they have well, the word just went right out of my mind. They have a responsibility to oversee. And the reason that the Congress has done that is because there are a limited number of people in Congress. There are 535 today, 435 in the House of Representatives and 100 in the Senate, and they don't have the ability to go out and do all this policing on their own. And of course, the Congress has also set up the Internal Revenue Service. And we hear a lot of people, and I always take the time to do this, we hear a lot of people in the United States who grumble about paying taxes and then condemn the IRS. The IRS is established by an act of Congress. It's not the IRS that's doing things, it's the IRS that's doing things because Congress told them to do it. So we have to remember when we start complaining about the IRS, our original complaint should go to the United States Congress. And after all, the IRS is actually going out and making sure people pay the taxes that they're supposed to make, and then bringing money into the federal government so the federal government can do the things that it's supposed to do. So we have to be careful when we talk about things like that. Now, this is a thing that we probably, many of us may not know, and some of us may, and that's all well and good. So we talk about tort law. What is a tort? A tort is a harm that someone caused to someone or something. Notice here we talk about property. Now, remember, this harm does not just have to be bodily harm. It can also be the reputation. Reputation, in some cases, sometimes it's very difficult to prove that someone's reputation was harmed. But we see those lawsuits all the time. Notice the next thing that we talk about, an intentional tort. That is when somebody actually intended to do the harm that he or she did. I'll give you the difference here. If someone commits aggravated robbery, what we know is that that person had planned the robbery and he or she carried it out, most often with some type of a weapon. Somebody who commits, I don't want to say commits a crime, but commits something which is known as vehicular homicide or vehicular manslaughter. Unless that person actually intentionally meant to use his or her automobile to harm someone else, or in the case of homicide, to kill someone else, then it's not intentional. They can still be held liable for the harm that they did, but it's not intentional. And then negligence is exactly what it said. It says, because I did not pay enough attention to what I was doing, I caused harm. That harm is usually unintentional. I didn't intentionally go out of my way to harm someone, but because of my negligence, I did. And therefore, I can be held liable for that. We have here a thing called product liability. And the product liability says we're going to hold a business or a firm, a manufacturer, liable for harm that the product that they manufactured or the product that was sold was not designed properly, did not give specific warnings, etc., and caused harm. Strict, that goes on from there to strict product liability, which says this is, and I want to read this to you because it's very important to get the distinguishing between the two here. Liability without regard to fault. So here a company can be held liable for a defective product even when they did not know about the defect. So the difference between product liability and strict product liability. One obviously is more harsh than the other. This particular slide gives you some product liability, major product liability cases Ford Motor case in 1978 for the Pinto, Jack in the Box, because the company sold hamburgers that were contaminated with E. coli. General Motors, damages a faulty fuel tank case. And there's the tobacco companies, 2004. Companies have protection, and this is one of the areas that the United States, and I'll get into this, the United States has some problems with foreign companies, that foreign companies do not do a very good job, foreign countries do not do a very good job of policing and assuring that intellectual property rights are maintained. Intellectual property rights come in things like patents, copyrights, and trademarks. And we think about this of people who write songs, people who write books, people who produce movies, fall into this general category. Now, we know what a patent is. That's somebody holds something that that person either made or invented, and that person has the exclusive rights to market that product and to sell that product for 20 years. Once the 20 years is over, that patent goes away. And so what will happen in many cases is that people will buy patents, will sell their patent to a larger company and then go on with, with something else. Now there has been some mischief that has creeped into this, where companies are suing people for patent infringement, when in fact they don't own the patent in the first place. They're just suing people, and they're going out trolling and finding things and suing people for patent infringement. They don't own the patent, but they cause all this trouble. And so the patent holder many times just decides to settle to get out of the case. Courts have taken a very, very, pardon me, very, very dim view of this practice. It has lessened to some extent. It's not quite as prevalent as it was about 2 or 3 years ago, but it's still around. A copyright is something that we normally see associated with things like a book, perhaps a movie, a piece of a song, a song written, articles, paintings, photographs, etc. Now we don't think of the old masters like Renoir and Picasso and those people as holding copyright, but in fact they could. And if they were alive today and they decided to copyright that painting, that would mean that nobody could make a copy of the painting without their express permission. Same thing is true with authors. If you are going to quote from a book, you're prohibited from using more than X number of words. Now, the reason I'm kind of hesitating about that, some I've seen at 50, some I've seen at 100, some I've seen a little bit larger than 100. That comes from a combination of the author, the publisher, and perhaps if the author is deceased, his or her family. And so if you want to use more than those numbers of words, you have to ask for permission, and permission can be denied. A trademark, and we talked about trademark back in the marketing chapters, is or some company has a legally protected use of a name or a symbol, or in some cases a design that is associated with a particular product or a particular company that makes that product. For instance, Coke, C-O-K-E, is a trademark for Coca-Cola. Matter of fact, Coca-Cola itself might be a trademark. I don't remember that, but that is something, and nobody else can use that word. Now, these are patent facts, and I'm not going to go over that a whole lot, other than to tell you that if you are interested, if you have an inventive capacity and you're interested in developing a patent, get a hold of someone who knows patent law. It's kind of difficult to navigate that. Don't try to do it on your own. Foreigners certainly can have U.S. patents, and they do. And then remember, if you do own the patent, you have sole right to sell or license, etc., unless you decide to sell. And then, of course, if you did, that would move on to someone else. This is just a slide that shows you a number of companies and the number of patents they hold in 2010. Notice that there are a number of companies that are not in the United States. What's the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC? It is, as the slide says, pardon me, a comprehensive commercial law that covers sales and other commercial laws. 11 articles, and it covers, as it says here, a wide range of business issues. Warranties are part of that. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about making and enforcing contracts, which are also part of the Uniform Commercial Code. Two kinds of warranties, an express warranty and an implied warranty. Implied is imposed on the seller because he or she implies, if you will, that the product will perform in this fashion. And it will adhere to the standards set by that particular trade association. An express warranty, on the other hand, is something that's made by the seller. And the seller says to you, the buyer, this is what this product will do. And we rely on that express warranty when we purchase a product or products. Now we're going to get into an area called negotiable instruments. This means something that you hold that can be negotiated for cash, or something that you hold can be turned into cash. Maybe that's a better way of saying that. And notice here, this is commercial paper. This is covered by the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC. There are 4 conditions to make this piece of, I'm going to use the term piece of paper now. Doesn't have to be piece of paper, but normally it is something like that, that can make this particular thing that you hold negotiable. It must be written. In other words, what this says, this is what it says, et cetera, et cetera. It must be in writing, and it has to be signed by the maker. It has to be payable on demand at a specified time. It is made payable to the bearer. In other words, I hold this, and it is payable to me. It's like a stock certificate. We talked about stock certificates back in chapter 19. I own a stock certificate from Coca-Cola. Actually, my wife and I own some stock certificates from Coca-Cola. And I mentioned to you in chapter 19, most companies don't issue certificates anymore. But it's made out into my name and my wife's name, joint tenants. And we can take that to a securities dealer, and that's negotiable. And then contain an unconditional promise to pay a specified amount. And of course, that would be however many shares you owned times the amount that the stock was trading for on a particular day. Now we get to a thing called, again, we find this in a common law, UCC, contract. Contract is something that is a legally enforceable, what I want to say, agreement, as it says here, between 2 parties. It specifies something that's legally enforceable, as we notice that. And then we get to what's known as a breach of contract, and that is when one party fails to uphold his or her side of the agreement. terms of the contract is what it says here specifically. But once you enter into an agreement, it can become a contract. Now, here are the requirements for the contract. And the first thing is somebody has to make an offer. And then other person who is going to get into this agreement has to accept that. So I offer X, and you say, okay, I'll take X. There's some consideration. Now, consideration can be money, it can be property, it can be any number of things, but there has to be some consideration. Both parties have to be competent. In other words, if you make an agreement with somebody who is or has been judged as mentally incompetent, or he or she is institutionalized, a contract is void. It's void from the beginning, even before anybody entered into any agreements. The contract must be legal. In other words, if you would enter into a contract, I'm contradicting myself when I use the word contract here, but I have to use it to make the point. If you would enter into a contract with somebody, verbal or written, that you would purchase from that person something that was considered to be contraband, illegal, then it is not a contract. It's not enforceable. You couldn't go to court of law and say, so-and-so didn't pay me my money. Now, let's not talk about somebody changing this thing with a threat of a gun or something of that nature. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that meets legal parameters. And if the thing that you want to purchase or sell is contraband or otherwise considered illegal, you do not enter into a contract, regardless of who said what said who, and a promise to exchange money or anything else. And then finally, the contract is in proper form. Now, that does not mean it has to have whereases and therefores and things of that nature. It can simply be, in consideration for X from Tom Smith, I, Mary Jones, will pay Y. Both of you signed a contract, both of you dated, legal contract. Didn't go to a lawyer, didn't go to a notary public or anybody else. Legal contract. Now, breach of contract, we've talked about this a little before. This is an area that causes a lot of consternation. And contracts can be breached if performance clauses were not carried forth. And if there's a breach of contract, somebody might have to pay. And then also, because the contract has been breached, one party may not be required to do what he or she would have done had the contract remained legal. Now, of course, that assumes that the other party breached the contract. And of course, normally speaking, one of the two parties is going to breach the contract. And so these particular things can come forward. And one that I skipped over, were you to go to a court of law, a judge may say, okay, this has to be done. You agreed to this, you breached the contract, you have to follow through and pay. This is the Clayton Act of 1914. We're not going to deal with this a whole lot. This gets into antitrust law. And it does certain things. It outlaws, and I want to read these to you, exclusive dealing, tying contracts, and interlocking directories. This is where people just really got all together and said, okay, we're in together in this business, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was very difficult for a person who was not into these interlocking directories to compete with these large firms. This is part of antitrust legislation that happened over a period of years. Federal Trade Commission began in 1914 and is there to enforce fair trade laws, both within the United States and somewhat with outside the United States, although we normally use the World Trade Association to arbitrate trade disputes with other countries. The Wheeler-Lee Amendment Act of 1938 amended the Federal Trade Commission, outlaws false and misleading ads, and not only outlaws them, but gave the FTC the authority to police those type things. And the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936 prohibits price discrimination between buyers and sellers. So it doesn't apply just on one side, it applies on both sides. These are some high-profile antitrust cases. I'm not going to go through these. Of course, the most famous is U.S. versus Standard Oil in 1911. Broke Standard Oil into 34 separate companies. There are some other ones in there, and of course, the one we probably know best, current, even though it's 30 plus years old, was United States versus AT&T, which forced the breakup of AT&T. And that way, today we have many more carriers for long distance and local telephone calls than we had previously. Now, consumer protection, this is a big issue for us. The Congress enacted Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, which was part of the Dodd-Frank Act, 2010, which is a response to the the financial meltdown of 2008, which really started a year or so before that. So we have this consumerism, and these laws are designed to protect us, the consumer. This is identity theft. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. It's just what I like to refer to as a gee whiz slide. Not to say that's not important. It is important, but we're not going to spend any amount of time on it. Taxes. We have various forms of taxes: income, property, sales, and excise. These are different taxes that states slap on different companies. They call them sin taxes. This is one that talks about taxes on cigarettes. This goes back to 2011. You notice that New York puts a $4.35 tax on a package of cigarettes. We're a long way from the days when cigarettes used to cost a quarter or less a pack. This just asks if the rich pay taxes. In fact, they do. We just sometimes think that they don't. These are bankruptcy laws. Well, they're not laws. This is a slide talks about bankruptcy. There's three types. There's Chapter 7, which is straight bankruptcy, usually filed by individuals. Chapter 11, a reorganization plan filed by businesses, and then a repayment plan also filed by businesses. Now, when businesses do that, either Chapter 11 or Chapter 13, they have to get, first of all, it goes to a judge, but they have to get approval from their creditors. Chapter 7, and this is what happens in Chapter 7, and the way that claims are paid out. Now, you can see this in figure A6 on page A16. These are how the unsecured claims are paid in a particular order. And then I'm not going to get into that, something that you can see and you can look at and you can read for yourself. These are various companies that filed bankruptcy between, pardon me, 2008 and 2011. Deregulation is the bane of many people. They believe that deregulation will promote competition and that those companies that are not nimble and efficient will go out of business. There are other people that claim that deregulation has simply hijacked the consumer, hijacked and higher prices. And notice here, you see the picture of the airline. A lot of people will tell you today that airlines are no more efficient than they ever were, and the cost of flying on airplanes has continued to go up, and services continued to decline. Telecommunication industry and some public utilities have also gone through deregulation, although public utilities not quite so much. And the reason is it's very difficult to start a public utility, very expensive. I worked for a company for some years ago, and we were solicited to go with a different company to buy natural gas. And we did because we were a nonprofit, and it helped us. We were saving money. It was still delivered through the local utility, but we weren't not paying the local utility. Now, we were supposed to have a 2-year contract. The 2-year contract was terminated after a year, meaning the company wasn't making any money. I'm not going to go through this slide. You can see this figure A7 on page A18. It just outlines hamburger regulations in the United States. Before anybody gets upset about that, remember that we're talking here about food, about the quality of food, about the number of calories we're ingesting, and whether or not it meets standards. We can complain, we can say we don't need to do that, but yet you go someplace and not get something that you expected, and we would still hear the complaints. We're at almost 5:15. We have finished with our bonus chapter A. We're going to take a 5-minute break till 5:20 and come back, and we will be into bonus chapter C, which is managing risk. Please come back at 5:20. Thank you. Oh.
Oh, do they have overtime?
What's that?
Do they have
I
overtime?
said, what's that?
Okay, I'm gonna work on some more songs.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna work on some more songs, some good ones. Let's go home. Yeah, right.
Okay, 5:20, we're back. We're going to talk about the learning goals for this chapter, Managing Risk. Identify the environmental changes that have made risk management important. Explain the 4 ways of managing risk and distinguish between insurable and uninsurable risks. Find insurance policies and explain the law of large numbers and the rule of indemnity. And then finally, discuss the various types of insurance businesses can buy to manage risk. The question that's posed here is, what's enterprise risk management? Now, you may not think much about this. Enterprise, you can think of a firm, you can think of a small proprietorship, sole proprietorship, you can think of partnership, etc. So this is dealing with the program, the risks the program will manage. What type of risk is an organization going to have? So what this is enterprise risk management. Think of it as maybe as a concept in a way. What risk management processes, technologies, and investments will be required. And then finally, how risk management efforts will be coordinated across the firm. So it's something that the firm has to think about, and it's not something that is done in a vacuum, if you will. Now, there are 3 kinds, well, they're not 3 kinds of risk. We're going to talk about what risk is, and then the 2 types of risk. Risk is the chance that a firm will lose profit. And that also talks about the amount of loss. Speculative risk means that there is a chance of losing revenue, losing profit. That's speculative. There's a chance. There's also a chance that we won't. But pure risk means you haven't got a chance. You're going to lose. And there is no chance to recover anything. So you're going to lose. That's a bad situation to be in. Now, how do you deal with pure risk? Remember what pure risk says. You don't have a chance. You're going to lose. So you can reduce the risk. You can avoid it altogether. You can self-insure against the risk. That means that you set money, you set some of your profit aside. Now, it's that profit. You could do as part of your revenue. Of course, if you do part of revenue, you're going to reduce your profit. So it depends upon how you want to do that. You could set part of that aside to cover the risk, or you can buy insurance. And most of us choose the latter because we don't have the opportunity to reduce the risk and maybe not avoid the risk. Now, of course, if we're talking about automobile insurance, for instance, we could avoid that what's altogether by not driving. And there's some other things that you have to think about teenagers and things of that nature on your insurance policy. Those are issues that you have to go through and figure out how you can ameliorate those. One of the ways that parents do that for their teenagers is to send them to a driving school or have them take driving instructions from somebody who's licensed to conduct that, not just from a parent. And the object is that that's going to reduce the insurance to some extent, probably not as much as you would like, but better than what it was. This particular thing talks about the most costly disasters in the United States, headed by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, a loss of $122 billion. Now remember, this goes back to 2011, so it's 4 years old. We may have something that's actually, you can see on the bottom, it's April the 11th, 2011. And so it's maybe we've had something even greater than that. So we buy insurance in some cases to cover that. And one of the reasons many of these hurricanes are on here, of course, there's earthquakes as well. By the way, we don't have the Japanese earthquake and tsunami that happened after that. We have a couple of Japanese earthquakes up there, but not the tsunami that was associated with it. So one of the reasons we have this thing about hurricanes is that many of us today in the United States live within close proximity to water. And by water, I mean ocean or bay, or bays, or Chesapeake Bay, Gulf of Mexico, things of that nature. And of course, when you do, property damage continues to rise. What's self-insurance? I really leave this slide up here for a little bit for you just to kind of look at, but we have really talked about self-insurance. You're setting money aside either from revenue, money you've taken in, or from profit to say, okay, if something happens, I have this amount of money to pay for it. The problem with that is you probably don't have enough money, no matter how much you set aside, because it's very difficult for any of us to estimate, if we're not appraisers, estimate the cost of damage. So we do that. Now, the next bullet here talks about companies going bare. That means they're going to roll the dice and take a chance that nothing's going to happen. Risky. Any question about that? And this is no self-insurance, no insurance I can buy from State Farm or anybody else. So this is an issue that you have to think about if you're going to have a business and whether you want to do that or not. So I'm not here to tell you one thing or another, but I can tell you that reducing your risk to the best possible by buying insurance is probably the best way to go. These are uninsurable risks. You can't get insurance for any of these. And one of this is change in the market. Now, what this talks about here is, let's talk about the stock market. The stock market takes a plunge. You can't get your money back for that. What you could get your money back for is if an individual stock plunged and you, Mr. or Miss Investor, could prove that it was due to company malfeasance that the stock went down, you might, operative word might, be able to get your money back. And I use a case in point here. Several years ago, Procter & Gamble stock went down precipitously. The reason I use that, Procter & Gamble is a huge company here in Cincinnati. It's a Fortune 500 company. And many of their people who were retired were relying on the stock to be kept up for their pensions, etc. And so a number of the shareholders, a number of the pensioners that had Procter & Gamble shares went to court and sued and said, it's because of company malfeasance, et cetera, et cetera. They did not win their case. Political risk, we don't think of that too much in this country, but some other countries there is, where you have an overturn of government, et cetera. Personal risk, no, you can't get insurance for that. And finally, operational risk, that's the same thing. So operational risk would be, all of a sudden you're not operating the way you used to operate for various set of reasons. You're not going to be able to get insurance for that. These are some risks that are insurable. And we're going to talk here about some of these are very important to think about. First of all, the person who wants to take out the insurance must have something that's insurable. Whatever he or she loses must be able to be measured. Now, I want to stop here and say the measurement may not be quite what you want it to be. For instance, suppose somebody had a diamond ring. The diamond ring's assessed value is, let's say, $1,000. It probably means more than $1,000 to the person who owns it, but you aren't going to get that extra amount of money. You'll get whatever they insured it for. If they insured it for $1,000, that's what you would get back. The loss has to be accidental, and obviously, the insurance company is going to try to disperse its risk. It spreads that insurance out to other companies, and then the insurance company can set standards for accepting the risk. In other words, you're an automobile, and you have a number of moving violation points against your license. The insurance company can say, okay, we will insure you, but your premium is going to be increased and will stay increased until you do one of several things, until the points go off of your driver's license, or until you go to driver's license school, or you do something else that improves your behavior. Insurance policies, we all have them to some extent. If you buy a home, and you have a mortgage, most banks or lending institutions will make you have, and not make you have, they will require you to have homeowners insurance. A lot of times that homeowners insurance is factored into your mortgage. If you don't want to do that, if you have enough down payment, you can ask to take care of paying your insurance, et cetera, separate. And they'll let you do that. They don't like to let you do that because they make money on that. But that's beside the point. Premium is what we pay for the insurance. Car insurance is usually due annually. Normally speaking, most large companies will let you pay your insurance premium semi-annually. You may be paying a little bit more, but not a whole lot more. If you pay it monthly or quarterly, you will pay a significant amount of money greater than even semi-annual. A claim is something that you file with the insurance company because you said you had a loss over some insurable item. Insurance companies use the law of large numbers. The more people they insure, the lower your rate can be, as long as you meet certain standards. And they do this because they have some prediction as to how many, again, using automobiles, how many accidents or thefts there will be. And the larger the number, they can reduce the premium they charge you. And then, of course, the larger the number, they can reduce the amount of money they have to lay out. Rule of indemnity, you cannot collect more than the actual loss from whatever you insured. So you're not going to collect any more than that. If you're going to collect $100,000, that's what you're going to collect. You're not going to collect 105 or 110. What's insured for us, what you're going to collect. Two kinds of insurance companies, a stock company and a mutual company. A stock is just like any other stock-owned company, any publicly traded company we talked about in Chapter 19. A mutual company is a company that's owned by its policyholders. They may pay dividends, etc., but the policyholders are actually owners. So, as you know, it's a stock company. It's owned by the people who buy stock in the company. Those people may or may not own an insurance policy. So the difference is a stock company is owned by stockholders, whereas a mutual company is owned by the people who own the policies written by the company, by the insurance company. This just gives you the difference between some major companies that you know. For instance, Metropolitan Life, we see the blimp with Snoopy on it, is a stock company. Mass Mutual, New York Life, and Northwestern Mutual are mutual insurance companies. These are the health changes, health insurance changes. As you know, we have gone through major changes with the Affordable Care Act. Government is involved, as you may or may not know. Supreme Court is going to make a major decision, or hand down a major decision, or ruling, if you prefer, about whether some of the subsidies that are paid out by the Affordable Care Act are legal or not. That will have major ramifications. I do not expect that announcement until next week. The court typically tends to hold those types of announcements to its final week. The final week of the court session is next week, and the court's last day will be Tuesday the 30th until the first Monday in October. So we may not expect that ruling until next Tuesday. It's possible it'll come out on Monday. That's assuming the court will not meet on Tuesday. I don't expect to hear it until Tuesday, but that doesn't mean I'm right. These are various and sundry types of health insurance that can be offered by your company. Health maintenance organizations, preferred provider organizations, and health savings accounts. HMO's full range of options, restricted list of physicians. Preferred, these are contracts with specific hospitals and physicians, and usually people who belong to this pay some part of the bill, but you get to choose the physician. Even though there may be a restriction, you get to choose the physician. Health savings account is something that's tax deferred. You have to talk to your employer and make sure that the employer has that. And it could be beneficial to you because that money comes off the top and you're not taxed on it. We also have other types of insurance, disability insurance, which will pay part of your income if you're unable to work. Workers' compensation is not paid by any individual. It's paid by the individual's companies. And again, there's some provisions to pay for you while you're off work. Some will pay for health care if there was an accident on the job or something of that nature. Rehabilitation as well. This is some health tips. If you're going to get life insurance, life insurance, the company is betting you'll die, or betting you'll live. You're betting you'll die. And the reason that is, if your whole life, you're paying your entire life, and you're saying, hey, the sooner I die, the more my family can get. And the insurance company say, no, we want you to live. Regardless of that dichotomy there, you want to stay healthy. You want to have a healthy lifestyle. You don't want to smoke. You want to cut down on sugar. Want to cut down on fat. and things of that nature. Getting into insurance, do your homework, pick a good insurance company, find a good financial plan. Liability insurance is exactly what it says. This is insuring someone against, in one case, product liability, or in another case, professional liability. Professional liability, we see that happen a lot with people in medical professions, physicians, dentists, etc., being sued for what is considered to be negligence. And so they buy insurance. Product liability is exactly what it says. That's to help protect against claims against some product that was made defectively. Get back to a product liability insurance. A friend of mine, I used to work with him years ago as a physician, and he was a anesthesiologist. And he stopped his practice some years ago because he felt the insurance was too high. I don't think he was ever sued, but he just said the insurance was too high and it wasn't worth him staying in business. If you have a home-based business, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, make sure that your insurance company is going to cover that part of the business within your home. Most insurance policies don't do that. And so you might need to have a separate rider on your insurance policy to make sure that your business is covered. And this just talks about a little bit about more of what I said, but there are some things that I want to add here. Don't buy more coverage than what you need. Remember, you're not going to get paid for anything more than what is assessed. Small claims add up, so you might want to think about small claims not being too onerous to pay those out of your own pocket, and then find out about your home. If you have an older home, chances of things going bad in the home increase because of age, and so that can increase your insurance as well. Well, we've come to the end of managing risk. It's 5:41. Let's take a short break to 5:45, and we'll come back and talk about managing personal finance. Again, a short chapter, so we'll take that at that time. Thank you. Please come back at 5:45. 5:45, we are back for our final chapter, final 20 or 30 minutes of our sessions. And we're here talking about managing personal finance. Learning goals for this chapter, we're going to outline the 6 steps of controlling assets, explain how to build a financial base, including investing in real estate, saving money, and managing credit. Hopefully some of this will buttress what you saw in the video about Morningstar, chapter 19. I'll give you some additional information about investment. And we've talked a little bit about that before. Explain how buying the appropriate insurance can protect your financial base. This is a little bit different than what we talked about before because we didn't talk about protecting your assets as much as financial assets. And then finally outline a strategy for retiring with enough money to last a lifetime. That's kind of difficult because we don't know how long the lifetime is going to last. And I'll give you an idea about that. Tom Brokaw, the former NBC News nightly anchor, recently was talking about a book that he wrote, and Tom Brokaw had some cancer issues a couple of years ago, and he talked about when he got to his age, he's around 73 or 74. He said that it's a time when there's no permanent things around. You realize that your time is fleeting. I don't mean that to be maudlin, but it's a fact of life. Financial planning begins obviously with making money and then doing something with that money to earn more money. Notice it talks about an individual who is employed, who earns a 4-year degree, earns about $50,000 more dollars, 62% more than a person with a high school diploma. And the lifetime earnings for a family with a bachelor's degree will be about 1.6 million more than a family with high school degrees. Premium on higher education. I hope that each of you realizes that. I know you're doing that in your pursuit and that it will be beneficial for you as when you graduate. All right, we have to take control of our finances. So the first thing to do is make a listing of what we have. And remember, everything that's an asset is not always in liquid form, cash or coin, or folding money or coin. Know how much money you spent. It's very critical to understand that. And it's how much money you spend in a given time. So most of us work on a monthly budget. And you can't say, as it happened years ago when I was in the military and we talked to young soldiers about it, well, it only cost me X number of dollars for the TV, and it only cost me X number of dollars for my car payments. No. You can't take those separately. You have to lump all those together and say, this is what I'm paying out every month. This is what I'm bringing in every month. Make a budget. Use the budget as a guide. That does not mean to say that sometimes you don't go off your budget. That does happen. Don't beat yourself up about it if you do. Try to get back to your budget as quickly as you can. Begin saving. I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about saving at a bank or savings and loan or credit union. I know they don't pay a lot of interest today, but that money is safe. It's not safe in the stock market. It's not safe in the bond market. None of that's insured by anybody. Get into the stock market, the bond market, only when you can afford to lose the money you have invested. Now, I'm not saying you're going to lose it, but only get there when you say, you know, if I lose this money, okay. And I'll give you an example. About 20 some odd years ago, 22 or 3 years ago, my wife and I bought a mutual fund, which we still own today, through a very reputable company. And I don't think we had, and you had to, in those days, I don't know what it is today, in those days, to get into the mutual fund, you had to have a minimum purchase of $2,500. And I almost immediately, the earnings per the amount it was worth per share lost a quarter. Well, when it was only trading at around $10 a share at the time, or worth $10 a share, that's a significant hit. And I remember being in Texas. I was in the Army. I was in Texas for a conference. And I have to call my wife, and we were talking. I said, by the way, with the so and such a mutual fund, she said, well, it went down 25 cents. And I said, well, let's not worry about it. Just let it go. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it now. We put that money in there. We want to keep it there. Well, 20 some odd years later, it's the best performing mutual fund that we own. So that's what I'm just using that as an example. Don't get panicked. Understand that I'm going to invest this money, and if I lose it, okay. I don't want to, but hopefully I'm going to make some money. But if I do lose it, it's all right, because I've prepared myself for that. Now down here it says borrow only to buy assets that increase in value, and we don't always do that. A lot of us buy a car, and we borrow money to buy the car. The car loses a huge percent of its value the minute it's driven off the lot. But we buy homes, that's a little bit different. We usually, property values, if you keep a home at least 3 years, you should get your money back plus a little bit more. So that's what that's talking about, although we tend to violate that fairly frequently, especially when we think about buying cars. This is what your household budget normally includes, either a payment for mortgage or rent, utilities, your food for a week or for a month, insurance, and then any other type of expenses. Those are the normal ones. Obviously, there can be additional ones. This just talks about what you could do, how you could save money by reducing some type of nice things to have. And it talks here about buying Evian water. I'll use that, how much it costs. And if you bought generic water, assuming that it came from a reputable source, then you could save a good deal of money. It's just giving you an idea of what to do. It's not telling you stop that. Each of us has certain things that they won't give up, and that's fine. But things that you can give up, or things that you can trade off, or use the alternative, that's how you save money. And those are ways that you can accumulate wealth over a period of time. This says you learned in the rule of 72. This is how we earn money, annual percent rate. I think most of us would be happy if we got 2% on our savings today. Most of us don't. And even though people may have a huge amount of money, they don't get that kind of interest rate. Banks just aren't paying that interest rate. If the Fed increases interest rates in September, which it looks like it's going to do, then those interest rates may go up, but it's going to be a while before they get back to what they used to be. This just talks about how money accumulates over time based on interest, and interest being compounded. this is just ways to cut back. There's nothing that's magic here. Uh, cut down on your cell phone bill, cut out cable TV. Some people might do that. I would, uh, but I realize there's some things I wouldn't get. But it wouldn't bother me if I gave it up. We have it. We had DirecTV before that, but it would not bother me. I always feel like I'm paying too much money for the little that I get, but then I don't watch a lot of TV, so I'm different than most people. Some other things you could do. Make sure your house is well insulated to help you cut down on your energy bill. Things of that nature. So there's a lot of ways to cut down on your expenses and to save money. I'm not going to talk about that. That's just one of those gee whiz slides. It's not something that's really that important to discuss. Uh, this is just ways, again, here ways to improve your finances. If both of you work, you and your husband work, or you and your wife work, uh, try to live on one salary and invest the other part. Uh, Buy a starter home, what they call it, and make some improvements and sell that. Of course, you have to hold the home about 3 years or so before you sell it. Buy for the long term. Don't buy for today. And we happen to be a society that looks for instant gratification, and we should stop and think about that. This just talks about living frugally. I mentioned that. Look at the first thing it said, or repeat what I said. Don't give up something you like, but cut back on things that are not essential. And one of the big ones right there is that I see is don't ever go shopping, especially for food when you're hungry, or don't go shopping without having an idea of what you want to buy. Now, if you're just going to go shop to look and get some idea of value, that's okay. I always say that women are shoppers, men are buyers. Women like to do this, men tend to buy. And what I mean by that, men go in that they have an idea what they want to do, and they buy that. But it's just telling you be prepared. That's all that means. And again, don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry, because you're going to wind up buying things that you may not necessarily want. Obviously, shop around. Uh, try to buy the sales. Take advantage of them. This is what helps you do when you buy a home. A home is an investment if you live in it. Of course, you can also buy a home, fix it up, and rent it out. Understanding that it's not going to be in the condition that you rented it out in, but as long as you can survive that, it's okay. A lot of people in the military have done that for years. Interest that you pay on your mortgage is tax deductible. There's a lot of people who say that's welfare for the middle class, and there have been initiatives over a period of years to take that away. I don't expect to see that go away anytime soon. And then it talks about your home and how you if you want to sell your home. The best thing I can tell you is the location. As it says on the slide, you want to be in a good school district and things of that nature. This talks about the amount of home you can afford, amount of house you can afford. I'm not going to go through that. It talks about your income, monthly payment, and you shouldn't be paying out more than 30% of your income. Savings and managing your credit. Contrarian approach, I think, is a good way to think that. Don't buy stock just because everybody else is doing it or the stock looks hot. You could get lucky. A lot of people don't. Be careful with credit cards. The annual rate on a credit card, many of them, is around 20%. And pay off the credit card as soon as the bill comes due. Don't borrow on credit cards. It's just, remember when you use a credit card, you're actually asking for a loan, and a credit card company loans you the amount of money for that purchase. And then he or she, the credit card company, sends you a bill so many days later and wants you to pay it. And they want you to pay it right now. If you don't pay it right now, which they hope, they're going to add tax interest onto that. So watch that because that interest really tends to go up. This is just credit cards. I'm not going to talk about that. Debit cards have come around. Credit Card Act 2009 allows card insurers to increase interest rates only for a limited number of reasons. It doesn't mean they won't. Be careful about that. Again, I repeat, pay off your credit card bill when it comes every month. It just is very important. I have people near and dear to me that I have a hard time convincing that of. This is our credit card debt, which can really get you worked up if you look at it too much. This just repeats some of what I've said. Pay your bill on time. Don't shift balances around. I know you can get some good deals on that, but that's going to come back to haunt you, especially if you have balances. Don't apply for too many cards at one time, and don't terminate your card because that can cause your credit rating to go negative, even when you have good credit with that credit card company. I can't explain that. I just know that that's a fact of life. It's not something that happened to me, but I know about it. Credit card rating scores, and you do have the opportunity, the right to know what your credit card score is at least once a year. Take advantage of that. Insuring your life, now there's a couple of ways to do this. Probably the best for a young family is to buy term insurance. And insurance companies would not like to hear me say that, but that's probably a good idea. You can get a lot of insurance for a very little amount of money. And that covers you, say, before you get to your peak earning years, or it covers you till your children are out of the house. And then you can think about something else, and maybe you don't need to think about anything else. Whole life does have some savings built into it. Whole life insurance does have savings built into it. You may want to look at that, and you may not. And in variable life insurance, what I would caution you about variable life insurance before you get into that, make sure you understand what it is. Make sure you understand the risk, if there is a risk, and what your payout's going to be, how long you have to hold it, and things of that nature. As you notice, they can be high yielding, but you always have some problems with that. An annuity, that's a contract that you have normally with an insurance company, and that they're going to pay you a certain amount of money over a certain period of time. And notice it says guarantees. Two kinds of annuities, fixed and variable. Again, when you come to the variable, make sure that you understand the contract before you sign it. I'm not telling you that anybody is not being honest with you. What I'm telling you is to make sure that you understand what you're purchasing, nothing more and nothing less. That's very important that you know that. Disability insurance, we talked about that before. That's buying insurance in case you're going to be incapacitated in some way to keep some of your income coming in. There are umbrella policies which roll everything up. Exactly what it says, an umbrella. You're protected under an umbrella. Covers health and disability and homeowners and a few other type things. That's who pays for health care. This is what you need to know about health savings accounts. Talk to your employer. Notice that the plans can be costly, but with withdrawal to pay medical bills is tax-free. They're not for everybody, and some of them can double as retirement accounts. Make sure you understand what you're signing up for before you sign up for it. Social Security, properly known here as Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Program, established by Act of Congress in 1935. and we pay that through Social Security taxes. And people are eligible to receive Social Security at a reduced rate at age 62, and then it gradually goes up. There's a lot of clamor about changing the Social Security age retirement rate, moving it up to 69. But the problem with that is that it actually hurts the people who need it the most. If they moved it up to age 69, the people who are affluent wouldn't make any difference. Move it up to 69, the people who need the Social Security would be hard pressed to have to stay in the workforce for an additional 4 years. Plus and minus to that, I would not be in favor of moving it up. I would be in favor of increasing the amount that people pay out for Social Security to maintain solvency. Individual retirement account, you can set that up through a bank. You can set up through a financial institution, of other kind of securities institution, etc. That's money that you put in into an account, and it is part of your retirement. Contributions are tax-free, not tax deductible. They're tax-free. You don't pay any taxes until you take the money out. Now, you can buy a Roth IRA. They don't seem to be as popular today as they were a few years ago. But the Roth IRA says you put the money away and you don't ever pay tax, even when you grow. Earnings grow tax-free, and they're tax-free when you take the money out, which is different than a traditional IRA. Roth was named after a senator from Delaware. As 401k plans, usually they're sponsored by employers, but you can buy them through a bank or some other financial institution, especially if you're a sole proprietor or you're self-employed. There are some Kehoe plans. We're going to talk about that next. That's the same type of thing, except that's for the self-employed people. Right here, same way. It can be withdrawn a lump sum or spread out over years. Same way with an IRA, by the way. And then finally, you have to decide what you're going to do with your money, who's going to inherit it. That's not something most of us like to either think about or talk about. And I certainly fall into that category. But it says who you're going to leave the money to. It establishes an executor of a will. He or she carries out the stipulations of the will and makes sure that final bills are paid and the money and assets are distributed. Talked about that right as the next person. So it's 6:06. I knew we would be relatively short this evening. I want to thank you for your attention and what you have done in the class, turning your assignments in on time. I've enjoyed reading your forum posts. I hope you paid attention to mine as well. The term paper is the last thing that is due. It is due by 11:50 next Sunday, January 28th. I thank you for your participation in this course. I trust that you've learned something. Several of you have said how much you've learned along the way in your posts and in your reflection papers. And I don't take that as a compliment to myself. I take it as something that you paid attention to the text and paid attention perhaps to the lectures and the lecture notes that have been posted, and you've looked at the videos and the case studies and been able to get something out of it. So I thank you for your attention, and good night.